It is Wednesday. RawMikeRichards.com, broadcasting live from the DKI studios in downtown Toronto out of the Pacific Junction Hotel. Today, coming up on the show, Dan Robson from Sportsnet, but also author. We just talked to Doug Gilmore on Monday. He was the author of that book, but also another book about Pat Quinn. And he is sort of one of my all-time favorites. He's the biggest Irishman I ever saw. I don't know Irish guys who had a head that big. But he was a beauty. There was a lot to his life, which is why I think it probably invited someone to actually, write a book about him. So I look forward to that. Dan will be in studio in about 25 minutes' time. I'd like to thank, actually, the guests this week have been fantastic. And Caroline Pierce yesterday, who was outstanding.
Yep. I hope she's going to come on again, right?
Oh,
Next time there's a UFC event or something of significance. That
I think the sun comes up, Dave.
Is that okay?
And now we go to Caroline Pierce in Los Angeles.
We're going to go with that?
I think any excuse we can have by the looks of the views and the participation yesterday on Twitter, I'm suggesting that she was very popular yesterday, Dave.
Quite.
Yeah, and by the way, Mark Cicchino from Golf Talk Canada, I saw some of those comments too. We just don't put pretty faces on. We don't just talk to people because they're attractive. I mean, you've been on the show.
That's true. Yes. That was a very good show.
Yeah. That show. And stop traveling around the world too, and just like on Facebook telling people all the places you've been. It's becoming annoying.
Hate people like that.
Yeah.
You want some breaking news right off the top?
I do want some breaking news.
This is just coming in. So, major piece of NFL news that I could tell you about.
NFL news? Okay. Let's go to the late-breaking desk.
Late-breaking desk. Okay. I like it. It'll work. This just out of Buffalo Bills camp. Sean McDermott, the head coach of the Buffalo Bills,
yes,
just spoke to the media minutes ago and has said that Nathan Peterman will get the start at quarterback in Los Angeles against the Chargers. So Tyrod Taylor has been sat on the bench, and Peterman will get his first NFL start. And good luck, Buffalo.
Yes, Peterman. Yeah, it's Peterman.
Fine, man.
Yes, well, so I'm assuming that's off the board now.
Numbers have actually kind of stayed the same.
Really?
Chargers at -4. I don't look at Tyrod Taylor as a numbers jumper or anything of that nature.
But still, if he's been the guy, Dave, calling the signals, he's the guy who gets all the reps in practice.
Last number of years, exactly.
Like I got to think that there would have been some sort of movement.
Now Peterman looked good actually. I saw a couple of Buffalo Bill exhibition games this year, but that's exhibition, right?
Yeah.
A lot of guys look great in exhibition.
Russell looked great in exhibition.
Yeah, he wasn't bad. I can't believe the Chiefs cut him. But the thing is, Peterman also played a couple snaps in their last game against the Saints. So we'll see. He gets the ball in Los Angeles against the Chargers, where they're expecting 5,500 roaring Charger fans to be in attendance. So
I think some people just go for the.
Isn't that sad?
The beer maybe is a better. I don't know. I don't even know why they go.
I mean, if you're the Chargers, first, why the hell are you moving away from San Diego? You got to make that work. Second, if you're going to move to Los Angeles in a couple of years, stay in San Diego. Stay there.
I've never been to San Diego, but people who do,
it's outstanding.
They love it.
It is outstanding.
Yeah,
it's one of the best cities in America.
Yeah. Looking at that schedule, so we talked about this week. So it starts with Thursday nighters, Tennessee at Pittsburgh.
Great matchup on a Thursday.
Thank God. Well, maybe you might get a decent game out of that. Then there's some interesting matchups. Although Chicago was so bad this week, I don't know if Detroit really is going to struggle all that much with that team. I got to be honest. The number even dropped a little bit. I think it's under a field goal.
Yep.
Jacksonville, Cleveland, no one cares about. Baltimore, Green Bay have no interest. Tampa Bay, Miami, 0.
Yep.
Los Angeles at Minnesota, all of a sudden.
Very interested in that game.
It's going to be a good game.
That's a massive game. Two good teams. And what I like about this is a great defense against a great offense, because the Rams can throw 32 at you in a blink of an eye, and the Vikings can shut you down.
But Case Keenum's been putting up some points too.
He has. He threw for 4 touchdowns last game in the win against the Washington Redskins, but also threw 2 lousy picks. I had a chance, actually. I was on Sportsnet last night. I had a chance to talk to a Vikings beat reporter. We kind of discussed Case Keenum, and the thought process is, if Case Keenum slips, not falls, but slips, Teddy Bridgewater is in the game. That's how small that chain is, because what we're hearing is the Vikings think they could do something this year, but don't think they could do it with Case Keenum. They think they could do it with Teddy Bridgewater. So,
well, that will be very interesting. I mean, I like Teddy Bridgewater, but the way the team is playing, the way it's going, the old adage is that starting quarterbacks don't lose their job because of injury.
Yep.
So I guess that's going to stick, but that'll be interesting to watch.
And they invested a first-round pick in Bridgewater. Bridgewater isn't the journeyman, signee, fifth NFL team that Case Keenum is. And Keenum's made the most of it. What Case Keenum has done is ensure himself another contract next season.
Sure he does.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Because guess what? If I could be a journeyman quarterback in the NFL, sign me up right now.
See,
I'll leave.
He's stock up because, that experience and his reputation come out of Houston, and I'm talking about the Texans now, not even the Houston Cougars where he played his college ball.
Blockbuster.
Yeah. So he came with this huge fanfare. He was the local guy. And it doesn't work out for the Texans because from time to time they have been a mess, and his reputation takes a bit of a hit.
Yeah.
So guys even like Clark Judge, who join us, the mention of Case Keenum, he goes, well, he's not an anti-Case Keenum guy, but how can you be a pro-Case Keenum guy? Because he just hasn't shown any consistency. Well, now he has. So if you're in his camp, if you're his agent, he has done himself a world of good, even getting this far.
Yeah, he's an insurance policy to another team next year. I don't know if he's going to be with the Vikings next year because they're going to have to figure out something. Because you have Sam Bradford, you have Teddy Bridgewater. Are you going to keep both of them? I don't know if either one of them want to be a backup. So maybe Case Keenum sticks around in Minnesota too. But he will be an insurance policy somewhere, and he will get another contract, just like what the Jets are seeing with Josh McCown. Josh McCown was supposed to be a caretaker quarterback, but when you look at the passer rating, he's a top 5 guy.
No.
And is ruining a lot of Jet fans' hopes and dreams of a lottery pick. But he's insuring himself another contract somewhere else next year. Likely not with the New York Jets, but nonetheless, it's all about guaranteeing that next contract, guaranteeing a multi-year deal, trying to figure out who the next city is, because we're talking about 2 quarterbacks there with those 2 examples that have kind of passed around the NFL and have worn a lot of different helmets.
Other games that you're probably going to watch this week, the Sunday nighter is Philadelphia-Dallas. Should be pretty interesting, but if the trends are showing the way that things are going, there's no Ezekiel Elliott. Philadelphia, I think, was only a field goal, and I'd be all over that. Even on the road, I just don't see Dallas as much as they've got to play a lot better on that offensive line. But really, the way Philadelphia's played, do I trust them with a field goal? Yeah, I do. I would. I would.
The Eagles are the class of the NFL, and I never thought I would say that through 10 weeks.
But they are. I agree 100%.
They're that good, and now they have Jay Ajayi in the backfield, which is just a great addition to a team that already has offensive weapons. The defense for the last couple of years has always been very good, and Carson Wentz is turning into an MVP candidate. He's in my top 3.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, a lot of football people, I would probably put Sean Salisbury also, who we talk to from time to time, in that category. The real deal from North Dakota. A lot of guys aren't going to know that program that are sort of casual football guys. But I'll tell you, for a small school, they have their own dome, by the way.
Yes, been to it. The Fargo Dome.
Yeah, the Fargo Dome. They love their football there. It's a good athletic program for a small school, but trust me, if you're in that part of the world,
yes,
and you don't get that big ticket to one of the schools in the sort of the Mountain West, and I don't mean by the actual division Mountain West, but I'm just saying in that part of the world, if you don't go to Montana, if you don't go to a Wyoming, it's very possible that you'd end up in a program like that.
Yeah, you know what? You look at the 2 North Dakota universities, North Dakota State, where Wentz is from, and North Dakota, the Fighting Sioux, and what they have with their programs. For example, the Fighting Sioux, the hockey program they have at the Ralph Engelstad Arena, it's in the middle of nowhere. And it is an NHL rink.
It's a shrine.
It is.
Yeah.
It is better than some NHL rinks that I've been to. And if you ever, I don't know what kind of audience we're talking to, but I know a lot of Manitobans will know
Tons.
this.
Yeah.
if you ever get a chance to see a Fighting Sioux hockey game, I got a chance to when Jonathan Taves
Well,
played
Jonathan
there.
Taves was a star there. A lot of stars have come out of there.
It is a mecca. It's a hockey factory, and there's no reason why. And there's a reason why people go out of their way to hopefully get that opportunity to play for them.
Also, I would say that the Monday Nighter looks like it could be intriguing. Atlanta at Seattle, but they're both the two flakiest teams I know
They are.
in the league. You just really never know who's going to show up. And
No Richard Sherman, by the way, for the Seahawks. That's big in the secondary.
You know, because, again, Seattle's one of those teams where those games almost historically are low scoring. Like Atlanta was known as putting up points, but I don't know about that.
Not this year.
So you'll hold your breath on that game. That's a tricky one, of course. And then maybe the bigger of, I think, and even sort of intrigue-wise, you got New England at Oakland at Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. That is going to be one we actually circled this before the season started because we thought if Oakland was going to do anything, then maybe this is the game where they prove that they're as good as we think they can be. So, of course, you got to think with Bill Belichick and all that they would be that's a lot of preparation, I would think.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? Not only preps for Bill Belichick, but I have to figure out that, considering New England's coming off a recent bye, so I've been kind of tracking him a little bit on Twitter. Social media has him in a lot of different comedy clubs. And so I just want to bring him back to the show because he was such a big hit about 3 weeks ago. We welcome Bill Belichick to the Raw Mike Richards show. And, Bill, it's been a while, but I have heard some of your material. And you know what? I'm really excited to have you back on set. And how are things?
I'd like to do a couple of jokes for you.
Oh, yeah. You want to get right to it? I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. The floor is yours.
I'm on the jokes. Why does the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, why do they wear red?
I don't know. Why do the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wear red?
Because they're embarrassed because they're so shit.
Okay. I'll give you that one.
What is blue? Stands outside, loves orgies, and has two thumbs.
Blue stands outside, loves orgies, and has two thumbs. You got me. I don't know.
This guy.
Very good.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, Tom told me that one. Yeah. Okay. And then finally, how do you know how heavy a red hot chili pepper is?
I don't know. How do you know how heavy a red hot chili pepper is?
Give it away. Give it away. Give it away now.
That's good.
It's for the,
you know what? You kind of inspired me, Bill. Could I tell you a joke?
I'm sorry. I'm on Oakland.
Nuts.
I'm on Oakland.
Well, good luck in Mexico City.
Yeah.
Say hi to Austin Matthews' cousin, by the way. I think he's going to be at the game.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Fart.
It's Bill Belichick in the Comedy Hour. Requested a lot on Twitter, and you got it right here on Raw Mike Richards, and you never know when he's going to show up again.
Those were good ones too. I think that was.
I think he's improving. I think
he's working a little blue now. I see, but
a little bit. But sometimes you have to add that in.
Speaking of blue, Dave. Speaking of blue,
he didn't go Bob Saget on us.
No, he didn't.
I'm happy about that.
No, he didn't. A team that wears blue last night had a big night.
Yes.
In Winnipeg. It was your idol.
It was.
I can say idol.
Yeah, that's fair.
Dale Hawerchuk gets Dale Hawerchuk night, and I think of if we're listing the biggest nights you can have in Winnipeg hockey.
Yes.
Is Solani one, or is it Dale Hawerchuk? Because that's a tough one.
That's a really tough one. My generation would say Hawerchuk. The next generation would say Tamo Solani.
Yeah.
Like when I was at that Winter Classic game with the Oilers and Jets, Dale Hawerchuk got a massive standing ovation. Solani went more, and I think I'll be honest with you. I think personality wise, Tamo comes off a little bit more friendlier than Dale Hawerchuk. I've met Dale a number of times. Yeah. I love him. I think he's great. He's always been very personable, but Solani has that extra something
and that's the, you know what, you can talk to as many hockey guys as you want. And by the way, Kelly Rudy, if you're finally get on the show.
Yeah.
What's taking so long?
Any day, Rudy. And what's with the H in front of the R?
Come on.
Rudy? Rudy?
Stop it.
Damn it.
And Shane Knighty. Where are you, Shane Knighty?
Yeah, there's another guy.
Yeah, come on.
H in front of the
Both of them. Yeah, I know. Tricking us.
These two silent H's.
They could be terrorists. Anyway.
I don't know if I go that far.
Pierre Maguire, you go down the list of those who have interviewed these guys for years, whether it's between the benches, whether it's a post or pregame, or it doesn't matter. The one name that comes out as being, as you in the way you put it, that little extra something, that little special whatever. Teemu Selanne is almost the top name on that list by all those guys.
Yes.
Every time they say, if you want to have a really interesting conversation, because the guy's actually pretty cerebral as well, very articulate.
Is, yes.
And they go, he is so unique that he might be one of the more special personalities. And so I know when you're saying that, I get, because you've probably talked to Selanne.
I've talked to Selanne numerous times, both professionally and personally, even more than Hawerchuk actually. And the one thing that I'll always remember.
Well, the restraining order would have slowed some of that down.
That's true. That's true. but
Dale, that boy's out in the front again.
The one thing I'll remember from Teemu Selanne, and I think I've told you this story before, but I was working with the Score at the time, covering the Calgary Flames, and this was during the Red Mile years.
Oh, yeah.
Of when the Flames went to the playoffs. The first round wasn't good enough. They just kept on going, and these were some really good teams, including a team that went to the Stanley Cup. Should have won the Stanley Cup, too.
To a lot of Calgarians?
Yeah.
Won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, exactly. I love Dave Andrewchuk, but Dave Andrewchuk, that's not your Stanley Cup. That's Jerome McGinless. So anyway, I guess it was a year after the lockout, first-round matchup, Flames and Anaheim Ducks. I'm new to the national scene at the time because this is my first actual national job. I'm doing well there in Calgary. Everything's great. Everything's rolling. And they wanted Teemu Selanne one-on-one, just a pre-tape to look live kind of thing.
Yep.
We're having all sorts of camera problems, and my camera person had to actually replace something, so he had to go to his car and then drive somewhere to get something. And you know where the Saddle Dome is. Nothing's ever fast in that area because of
you're not close to anything.
Traffic
really.
and everything. Yeah. And I said to him, I said, Teemu, I can't do the interview. I explained the situation, and I said, my camera guy is going to be back here in about 25 minutes, and I don't want to keep you that long. So I basically put it all on myself. He turns to me and he says, Dave, I'll just work on the bike for a little bit. And he waited 25 minutes, did a little extra work in the playoffs.
Nobody does this.
Nobody does that. I have had guys that if I'm not ready for the microphone within 5 seconds, they'll walk away. Troy Gloss. Yeah, dick. So Teemu Selanne, exact opposite. And I don't know if he was just doing that for me. I like to think it was, but I truly think that he'd probably do it for that guy walking across the street that's been yelling on his cell phone all day and doesn't have a microphone. You could shut up anytime. I think he would do it for him, too.
Yeah.
That's how good of a person he is.
It's just, who was talking about the other day, sort of the bigger they are, it's the easier to deal with. I'm trying to think of who we have dealt with. Maybe, it might have been Rory Karpf.
Okay.
Who said, these big names, the Paul Newmans, like these big guys they talk to, and of course Rory's the one who did the.
Speaking of big names, that guy's interviewed everybody.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. He said basically the quality is that the bigger these guys are, like of the giants of the industry, that the easier they deal with. It's the newbies, the guys who think that they're all of that and haven't put in the time nor have the legacy, that they're the more difficult ones to deal with. And I agree with him 100%. That is exactly how it is. So, so for Dale Hawerchuk last night in Winnipeg, again, of the hallowed names that you could have, certainly in hockey, this way, the courtesy of, I believe, the actual Winnipeg Jets PR. Yes. I think one of their guys took this. And so the magic and just sort of the emotion of what happened last night in Winnipeg for Dale Hawerchuk. There it is. What do you think of the building, by the way, Dave? What do we think of?
Love the building. Love the building. My only problem with the building is when they made it. Why the hell did they make it so small?
Oh, I thought that was a stipulation that they had from the city about. I don't know. I thought there was something to do with not the team itself or those that own the team, but from other facilities or whatever it was about how big and how whatever. I thought there was as I said, a stipulation upon them building it that they could only have it a certain size.
Yeah,
which doesn't make sense to me. But
no, it doesn't. And I think now that you say that, I think it does have something to do with that because of also logistics and where the building was actually made. They wouldn't be able to add the extra 1,500 seats that ideally you'd want, because ideally NHL rinks, you should have at least 16,000 seats in there, preferably 17,000 seats to tell you the honest truth, because you want to kind of get more value in there. The ticket is hard enough to get it as it is, so if they had a bigger facility, they'd fill that one too. But it is a nice facility. I grew up in the Winnipeg Arena, which was known as a junk pile, but I loved it.
I love the Barns.
It was my junk pile.
Quirky places are the best places.
Just like I like the smell of the Joe.
Sure,
that's just me.
The Joe was awesome.
I liked NASA Veterans Memorial Coliseum in New York. A lot of people think that's a pile of crap too. But
even the Saddle Dome, which I don't know. I mean,
I like that one too.
It's so confusing to me because they talk about that new building all the time, but just the fight they have between the NHL, between the mayor of Calgary said, we're not giving you money. It's a bizarre situation. I think.
Yep.
Very bizarre.
I remember, and Russell might remember this one too because he was probably like 3. I remember when I was at the Nassau Coliseum, and Vesa Toskala was in net for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Maybe.
And there was a shot taken from just to the left of the Islanders goaltender that skipped down the ice and fooled Vesa Toskala from almost 200 feet, and we all got a chuckle out of that.
Those are tricky.
Those are tricky shots. He got in the way of an icing call, and he let it in. YouTube it, Vesa Toskala on Long Island if you're kind of curious about it, because it's funny. I was at that game, and we all looked at each other and went, "Oh, Jesus."
Well, he's terrible. Worst goal I've ever seen.
And the funniest part here, and I know Russell will like this one. The funniest part is when John Ferguson Jr. made that deal for Vesa Toskala, they traded away some draft picks along with some players, and one of those draft picks, I don't know if they could have used them today because he's a so borderline NHLer, but Logan Couture, I don't know if he would have fit into this Leafs lineup, but. Am I going Bill Belichick on you too?
I'm getting ready for that.
But nonetheless, these things happen, and JFJ made a lot of questionable deals, and then he was kind of preceded by the second rendition of Cliff Fletcher in that position, and he ended up trading away a borderline NHLer named Alex Steen. Who I don't know what happened to Alex Steen, but they got back Lee Stepniak, which was another good trade because I don't think the Leafs could have used Alex Steen and his 40 goals per season on a first-place team.
How many teams did Stepniak play for?
17.
Yeah, I was going to say, he played for a lot of teams. Dan Robson, by the way, going to come up in a couple of minutes here. The book, Pat Quinn, and we had Doug Gilmour on Monday. He did that book, too. Is he writing every book now?
He is writing every book. Yeah, Quinn, The Life of a Hockey Legend, and indeed a major, major hockey legend. I'm looking forward to this one. We could talk NHL with Dan, too. He's a really good guy.
Okay, this was supposed to be some sort of dramatic music. Apparently, this is something done by Enya. I don't know. I have no idea what that was supposed to be.
Did Russell's iPod get in your computer there, or downloading some stuff?
Okay, here's a little suspenseful.
Fire.
Although I don't know if there's a lot of suspense, because if you're taking a look at the NHL in that first quarter, I see some talk about it. When you look at Steven Stamkos, kind of what he's been through.
Off the charts.
Like I couldn't be happy for a guy because I love the guy's act.
He's a Terminator.
And Kucherov.
Yes. I don't get that, too, especially leading the league in goal scoring. I mean, he's a really good player, but I didn't think he'd be dominating the goal scoring time. I mean, are you ready writing Rocket Richard's trophy with his name on it? I mean, holy crap. Just on fire.
Okay, I was talking about this when I was on this morning at 94.9 The Rock with Craig and Lucky. I said, in Canada, and this is where Roger Sportsnet, people, made a lot of fun of, George Stroumboulopoulos, and, that's the reason why it tanked. It tanked because there's no Canadian teams in there. That's the reason, truly, the reason it tanked. And I said, because regionally, once certain teams are out, Canadians aren't going to just turn around and start cheering for another city. It just doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. But I said if they do, there's a couple teams I think that fall into that category. I think Calgary's one of them. I think the rest of the country, Western Canada, would be a little picky. But I think it's either Calgary or Winnipeg they're okay with. But if I'm looking at an American team, if you had to actually sit there and say I want to watch a team I actually emotionally can become a little invested, I think it might be Tampa Bay. I think it might be the Lightning, and simply because I think Steven Stamkos carries a lot of Canadiana with them.
You like the play-by-play guy.
Oh, yeah. Dave Michigan's one of our favorites. But when you think about it, probably half that crowd that goes to the games, they're probably all from Canada.
They are.
And Dave Andrechuk, one of our favorites, Hamilton-born.
I talked to, on my podcast, I talked to Christian, Edge and Christian, the former tag team. So his name's Jay Russo. He's out of the Tampa area. He is a Toronto boy that probably goes to about 30 Lightning games a season, and he says it is loaded with Canadian fans and Canadians that live in the Tampa Bay area. Because who wouldn't want to live in Tampa Bay?
I don't know those people because I want to live in Tampa Bay.
I was going to say.
Maybe you're not right in Tampa Bay. I might live in Naples, perhaps. With my friends Tiger Woods and John Bon Jovi. Yeah, they live down. They're like neighbors almost.
Probably.
So when you go through their fancy little area, like there's a boat you can see where it's sort of kind of sightseeing.
Yeah.
The guy's talking the whole time. He's like, and to your left there is the house of Russell Graham. Not as big as some of the other ones. And I see he's nude once again. Don't do that. People don't like that, Russell. But as soon as he comes into the fancy schmancy area, he goes, I'll have to stop talking. They don't allow us to talk here. No talking. No talking. No talking in the fancy Tiger Woods, John Bon Jovi area of Naples.
Is there a sign?
It's awesome. I was just like, they just know.
That's awesome.
It's like someone's like, hey, do you think? Excuse me. Sorry, John.
I'd like to see that sign. No talking.
Oh,
no talking. Just like in New York.
It's Randy Johnson.
Yeah, in parts of downtown New York, it says no honking.
Yeah. Well,
and it's like, you want to bet?
Yeah. You're telling a New Yorker?
Yeah, no honking.
I'm not honking now.
Sorry.
Randy Johnson. Don't talk to me. That was a great start. Wow. We're going to talk a little bit about Pat Quinn, obviously, in some of the books that Dan Robson has written, obviously, nonstop for the last, I don't know what he's done.
That's all he's doing is writing books.
And I believe he is here. Did we not see him?
Did we see Dan in here?
Or am I making my dream? There he is right there. Very professional looking as well.
Yes.
Speaking of guys, Hamilton. A lot of people don't know Pat Quinn was a Hamilton boy. Probably the biggest Irishman I'd ever seen. Any time I got a chance to see him, and this was probably early back when the doctors allowed him to smoke cigars.
Yep.
That was a signature for him. And the biggest Irishman I think that from an Irish family and having been to Ireland many times, aside from Big Mick, I don't know if I've seen a bigger Irishman. So Dan has just written a book, and we're going to have him on next. Now, this goes to the, by the way, the induction, posthumous in the Hockey Hall of Fame. This is his daughter. Very emotional, but a good reason for it. But it was a wonderful moment. And as we bring on Dan, we take a look at this very emotional night.
For those of you that know my father, you would know that he would be taken aback by this recognition, and believe it or not, he would be at a loss for words. Dad had the most amazing opportunities during his career. Keith Allen, Bob Clark, Cliff Fletcher, Bud Poyle, Ray Miron, Fred Shiro, and many others provided a great amount of influence, guidance, and support as he started his post-playing career. It was actually Keith Allen and Bob Clark that finally convinced him to go to Philadelphia as an assistant coach.
That, once again, very emotional moment. Once again, that is Pat Quinn's daughter putting in Pat into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And now from Sportsnet and the world's busiest author. I mean, what's next? Is it got any books on, I don't know, Idi Amin, or what's coming up next for you? Because this is Dan Robson, ladies and
Dan
gentlemen, in
Robson,
studio.
yeah.
MikeRichards.com. There we go.
Thank you for having me. That would
Yeah.
be good, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I'm taking a little bit of time to work at Sportsnet,
Oh, that's good.
who employs me, so I need to work for them. So, but I've been I said Quinn a couple years ago, and just finished his book with Dougie, and that's out there right now.
Let me ask you a question first off. I just got this Quinn book sent to me a couple of weeks ago. Why was it redone or?
Yeah, it's a paperback. They send it out. They want people to take a look at it for Christmas. I mean, it's still out there, and it's still it was sort of around. Hopefully, people are still buying it. But yeah, I mean, I finished the biography and then kind of moved right on to Doug. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, between the two, there's certainly enough stories and lore and legend, and we just had Dougie. So Dougie was on Monday.
Yeah.
So we just talked to Doug, and I've known him for quite some time, and that's why I asked him. I said, you got some of the boys calling up going, so what are you putting in the book? I in the book. But as he said, because of his parents and the passing of the parents and just wanting to get that done, because what people may not know about Doug, of the many things that we all do know, his family is paramount to him. I mean, his kids and his parents, I mean, it is enormously important for him in his life.
Yeah, it was right away when we first met to talk about this, we chatted about his dad, who had obviously was incredible, just a source of, someone who was in his life every day. Like when he went back to Kingston to coach the Frontenacs, his dad was in the stands again, so it was sort of a full circle thing. And that's part of the reason why he went back to Kingston, but all those years ago, or just about like a decade ago, just to sort of be back at home in that time. He's really grateful he was able to do that. But the story of Doug that I tried to write with him was really more a story of a Kingston kid, a family that sort of made it after the sort of a blue collar working family, and a lot like Pat Quinn's family actually, and a really tight knit, close family. Like you said, family is everything for him. And unfortunately, his mother passed away about a week before the book came out.
Yeah, that was really
So
really
I know she had suffered from dementia for a while, and he was visiting her often in the hospital in Kingston. And I know it obviously it's incredibly heartbreaking. He's been on a tour with this book, and I think this has been an opportunity for him to reflect on that. And I think he was really happy that he was able to put the words down. He was hoping that she'd be able to see it, but it meant a lot for him to sort of reflect on it, especially now.
When you did this Quinn book, did you at all get a chance to talk to Pat about this before? Or was this through family, friends, just like it kind of says? But did you? Because I remember covering the Leafs, and Pat Quinn was the head coach, and he was when you talk about guys with stature, when he walks into a room, it's hard for me to think of another head coach in the NHL that came across like that to me as a reporter.
So this is the weird part, I actually never got to meet Pat Quinn in person as a reporter. I met him, the one time I did meet him was actually at Doug Gilmour's induction into the Hall of Fame when I was covering that, and I was doing a story on Gordie Howe at the time. So I was Gordie was there because Mark Howe was there, and I was I sort of saw Pat in the back of that sort of hallowed hall, the domed area, and it was like you said, he was just sort of this larger than life character, and he had this aura on him. I felt like it was a character I'd seen on TV growing up. I mean, watching the Leafs in the early 2000s, and I was too nervous to talk to him. I mean, I was a kid kind of being like, oh my goodness, that's Pat Quinn, and that is what he carried. And so no, I sadly didn't actually get to meet him and have a relationship with him before he passed away far too soon. And this sort of opportunity came just through my work as a writer, and Penguin really wanted a book about Pat Quinn. They wanted they saw the outpouring of emotion that happened when he passed away in November of 2014. And I think people were kind of taken almost by surprise. They realized how much he meant to people. Like that, you mentioned that sort of place he held in hockey lore, and how affectionate people were to him. And so they said, we really want to try and capture that in a book. And I set out to do that. So I got to, I started in Hamilton, Ontario. I sat down with Pat's sister Carol. I tracked her down and sat in the house that he grew up in at a kitchen table, and we chatted for an afternoon. And from there, I met Callie and Sandra, and went along with it and learned, sort of tried to go from the family out. So I got to know his family first, and then sort of went out from there and tried to basically speak to as many good friends as I could about his life.
There is something about not only the working class family that spawns on a National Hockey League star. It's almost and I wouldn't say rags to riches, because hockey players don't really carry themselves like that. As much money as you think maybe a Doug Gilmour or a Dave Andrewchuk would have made, they're not the type of guy that goes in and they're not bragging about how they could make it rain. It's just not in them. And I look at those guys, and of course Andrewchuk and Quinn, both Hamilton guys. I look at Doug's background, which was really sort of a working family. These guys, and not like having Murray Howe that we had on the other day talking about his dad and saying, these are guys who perceive themselves, I think, deep down to be lucky to be doing what they're doing, and I think they carry that with them. They also felt like they were working for a living, that they worked for a living. They didn't walk into an establishment or a bar or an event thinking that people should be, bowing at this podium, this pedestal they've been put on. I think all those guys have similar qualities, and that's why I think, as a rule, I don't mind working with hockey players. Yeah. It's relatively easy for us.
That's interesting you mentioned Murray, because I think that mentality kind of goes back to the ultimate legend that is Gordie Howe. And I actually had a chance to sit with Gordie and Murray together right before his dementia sort of started to take over. When I first started working at Sportsnet magazine, and I got to write a large profile with him, and I spent an afternoon with him. And that's the stories that kept coming back when I spoke to everyone else, was that Gordie was incredibly grateful about the opportunity he had. He had that sort of Saskatchewan sort of just like farm boy kind of upbringing, and very grateful, and he had this always talked to the fans and never really talked about how great he was, even though he was the best player. He wasn't even the highest paid player on the Red Wings at the time. He didn't know it at the time, but he found out later.
I think when someone puts Mr. in front of what you do for a living,
you've done it.
You're probably good.
Yeah, you're the best. And I think that what carried on, though, and I actually, I learned, I saw that in Gordie when I spoke with him, but he was obviously an old man at that time. But when I chat with, when I hear stories about Pat Quinn, and when I heard stories about, when I talked to Doug, you get the sense that like they're everybody else. They're the sort of average Canadian guy, and I think you're right that mentality does carry along, and sometimes it makes for frustrating interviews because you're kind of like, tell me something really interesting, and they're like, well, I went fishing, and you're like, okay, anything else? But for the most part, a lot of these hockey players are just they're regular guys, and there's a lot of humility, I think, in
totally.
sort of where they came from.
When you're interviewing, the Quinn family, and you just kind of touched on it there with your last answer, but how hard is that to get a lot of, like, I could tell you stories about my family, but then when you want to dive in deep, when you want to get right into the meat of it, because you're not talking to Pat, you're talking to the family, how hard was that to get them to start spilling?
It was tough. I think that the main thing I do as a writer, as a sort of writing books and writing features, I'm not a daily beat guy at all. I don't cover sort of the ins and outs of the NHL every day. I write features that are about the people. So sure. I had to approach it the same way I approached that. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book with Clip Malarchuk, the NHL goalie.
Sure, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He revealed his, obviously, this heroic battle with mental illness and that was a large challenge. And that sort of helped me. That was a good experience for me to then go into a completely different situation, but also to try and just show that they had no idea who I was. The Quinn family had never heard of me. They had no idea who I was. So I had to approach it as I had to gain their trust.
Yeah, so there's a trust factor there that they don't have.
They have no, and I'm like nobody. They have no concept of any work I've done. I sent them. So when I first sort of set out, I sent them the feature I did with Gordie Howe and talked about Clint's book and tried to sort of establish sort of a framework for the kind of work I do. But that means nothing until you meet somebody. So I think it was when I first met. I drove out to Hamilton. I drove to Glennie Avenue. I knocked on the door and sat next to Carol Ann and sat at that table. And it was, that was, as a journalist, that moment was really fascinating for me because I knew Pat Quinn's entire story comes back to that place. It begins there and it kind of ends there. And it's this it's that you mentioned before I came on about that sort of like blue collar Hamilton near the steel mills, and it was just, you could feel it, this like massive presence coming out of this tiny place. And from there, I think my conversation with Carol Ann went well, and she talked to her brothers, and then I reached out to the family, and it took some time. It took probably about a couple months. I went out and they had a Pat Quinn night in Vancouver. So I flew out for that.
He's a god out there too.
He's a god. Yeah. As much as big as he is in Toronto, I think Vancouver definitely holds claim.
Sure, they do.
The
I
Roar,
100%.
and they deserve it.
Yeah.
So we went out there and they had this massive night, and I sat down with Trevor Linden and I met with them, and I think that was just a matter of just trying to say, look, I want to tell the story of a life, and I want to. I want it to be warts and all, but I want it to be a story that is true, and I think, like, it shows not just the on ice accomplishments, not just sort of what he did in the game, but who he was and why he meant so much to so many people. Because I think it was much more than wins. It was about who he was to players, who he was to fans,
Sure.
Who he was to the rink attendants, and who he was to his family. So I tried my best to approach it that way, and they, eventually we had a great relationship, and I mean, it was a difficult time for them because he had passed away just when I first approached him a month earlier.
Right.
So I mean, it was
Still
very
sensitive,
difficult.
still sensitive at that
Incredibly
time.
sensitive, and it was sensitive right through. Like I wrote, I had to write it in a sort of quick time frame. We got it out, and it was still sensitive. And I think it definitely still hurt. I mean, speaking with Callie and stuff, I know it's still difficult. He was too young to die.
Much too. And you know what? We played part of that speech, and just listening to that, you kind of, because I remember watching that, and you reflect back, and you can't help not to get that lump in your throat because of what Pat meant to. Not only as a father, a coach, as a human being out there. So you mentioned Trevor Linden. This guy, Pat Quinn, was not only a head coach, a general manager. He played in the NHL for a number of years. Like, this hockey was a life. Like when you talk about hockey lifers, and you brought up Gordie Howe earlier, Pat Quinn kind of fits into that same category as a hockey lifer that basically did everything from start to finish. Did you ever get a chance to talk to some of the players he actually played against?
Yes, I played with quite a few of them. I tried to sort of circle back to the Leafs of the Air. I tried to get Bobby Orr. He didn't speak with me. I tried
because I was going to ask
to chat with him about the hit. That was a big push, and I didn't get Bobby, but I spoke with pretty much anyone I could reach out to. I'm trying to think of a list in my head right now of the guys, but there's probably a dozen players that he played with, and it was interesting they all made fun of him because he was a bit of a. The thing about his journey, and you mentioned that sort of lifelong journey, was that it wasn't the same as Gordie Howe's in that he was probably the exact opposite. Well, I guess he was tough, but he was the exact opposite in terms of success. I mean, he spent 10 years in the minors.
Exactly.
Going to Tulsa and going all over. It was I think it was 10 different teams. I got to remember now. But he was traveling around with Sandra, and he's got these young kids in tow. And at the same time, he's going and getting his education. But he's a slow player who obviously is a big guy, and he can't skate very well. And what I found that was really fascinating about him was the stories about him being this sort of a big Irish presence, the big sort of guy that you would see later on as a coach, but also the guy that would go to figure skating lessons or go learn from a figure skating coach how to become a better skater. Wow. So he was up at
I'd pay to see money.
Yeah,
I'd pay to see that.
The rink in North Toronto. I can't think of a name right now either, but it was he was up there, and it was Tam O'Shanter, and he was up there.
Oh, Tam O'Shanter has been there.
And he's getting lessons. So I remember just learning about that, and it was sort of like a great story. But yeah, it was interesting to chat with all those guys, because I think my goal too was to go out and not do to try and do a story that we didn't know as much. So I spent a lot of time learning about those years as well, trying to get a sense of what before he became a coach with the Flyers, what drove him, what made him. And I think the fact that he wasn't the best hockey player helped him become a better coach.
Well, you're not that dissimilar to Sean Menard, who was in here, and Sean talking about doing that movie on Carter and Vince Carter. Is that he said, the one thing that you have to find for yourself doing this, and I think whether you're directing or producing for a movie or you're doing a book, you have to find that way of telling a story that hasn't been told. And a lot of things that you're saying sort of ring true, because we haven't had a chance to see the doc when it came to the Toronto International Film Festival. We couldn't even get in.
Yeah, I really wanted to see it. And I couldn't see it either.
Yeah, you couldn't get in. And I think that's the interesting thing when you find an interesting subject. So, you're talking about Pat Quinn, and you're talking about Doug Gilmour. And now Dougie is still out signing. I saw him, he was out in...
he's in Calgary today.
Oh, he's in Calgary today.
He flew out to Calgary last night. He's in Calgary, and he's in Saskatoon. And then he's in Winnipeg. So
these are guys that not only are going to lend itself to telling these stories, but as we said beforehand, it's also a bit of a win, because in Canada certainly, we look up to these guys, and you hope that your heroes fit a dimension that because a lot of people are big on I want my kids to be like this guy, and look, as people who've known me for a long time, I always tell them, don't do that. Don't look to a professional athlete to get your ethics and morality from, because quite honestly, it's going to be real hit and miss. Now, do some of them, quite frankly, fit that bill? Yeah, they do. I think of Jerome McGinley.
Sure.
Jerome McGinley is so nice, like freakishly nice, that I wasn't sure if he was punking me when I first met him, or he's like, gee, Mike, I heard you won on Proline. You're up in my hometown. Did they treat you nice? He's got this big smile. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Is this guy for real? Honestly, does he really give? Yeah, he does. He really meant that. Yeah. He was serious about going up to St. Albert and going up and picking up $20,000 because I'm a degenerate and I won $20,000 on a Proline ticket. And he still asked me, did they treat you okay? Yeah, they were treating me fine. It was like Westworld. I thought maybe some wires were going to come out at some point. It just didn't look real. They're not all like that. But I think when you look at some of the lessons you can learn, I got no problem looking at the work ethic of a Pat Quinn, looking at Doug Gilmour, who for many accounts would be seen as undersized or all those other things that maybe he shouldn't make it. A giant in Dave Andrechuk, but still was the kind of human being. So, I think when you look at those kinds of stories, I mean, that's got to be good for you. I mean, that's got to be something you look for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you sort of mentioned that what I want to do is not write a story that, I mean, I read every story I can possibly read that has been written. I mean, we have an incredible source of media, and we have thankfully incredible sports media in this country and a great history of it. So I get to benefit from that greatly by diving through that. But then my goal is to then pull at some of those strings and get to know the person a bit more. And you mentioned sort of that, like a Jerome McGinley and what I find a lot of players that when they're outside of the locker room are obviously a lot different. And I don't know obviously all of them, but I know the ones that generally when you meet them, they're all just decent guys that are willing to chat. And when you can talk to them like a guy you're having a beer with, you start to get to those stories, and you're not you're talking to them not like, oh, I'm gonna now go and write this or tweet this right away. I'm gonna let's explore that. Let's talk a little bit more about what motivated you. What was it like, Dougie, when you basically were overlooked in the draft and that pissed you off, and he tells great stories like that. I mean, it's just like I want a book to feel like it's a chat at a bar, that it's like you're sitting beside the person that you admired and from afar, and now get to know in a more intimate way, and that's the fun of it for me.
The one thing I'll always remember too about Quinn, because I didn't see him as a player. I saw him as the Leafs coach. I saw him as the Canucks coach and Team Canada with the Oilers, that kind of thing. And I've had this conversation before with Don Cherry, and it was about the way Pat Quinn dressed.
Yeah.
He'd always have the three-piece suit on. He'd always have
very sharp.
Yeah, very sharp dresser. And Don actually talked about that once with me in depth. But was there something to it why Pat wore that, or did you ever get into that? Or?
Yeah. It goes back to his upbringing. Actually, I mean he always had like nice black shoes on when he was growing up, and there was a real I don't know how to describe it fully, but sort of this pride coming out of that hardworking household of like you dress your best, you look your best.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. It comes from that, because what is perceived to be dignified when you don't have a whole bunch of money, then that's the thing that you aspire to be, and I think those clothes were that. Well,
it was sort of Pat was driven, not in no way to be sort of derisive to the working class upbringing he had. That was everything to him. But he always wanted to be something more, something further. He wanted to. So he finished law school after he before he went to the Kings and he was done with the Flyers. He went and finished law school. He finished his degree at York over 10 years in the minors.
That's remarkable, really. Yeah. It truly is.
But that was what was driving him, because it was never enough to just sort of rest. It was like, I've got to be something better. And so the dress, the way that he always had that, I mean, he created a brand. He created sort
very
of this,
much so, yes.
the big Irishman, this sort of like, like big handsome guy when he was younger and like dressed really well.
And here's the thing too, I always thought it's a good thing he played before helmets were mandatory, because you ain't finding a helmet that's going to fit that head. I paid a lot of money to see a helmet on that head. I don't think they made him that big.
Well, he also Burke has a great story. I was chatting with Brian about because they're really good friends. And he
and you can see it too. I think even just so you look at them going, oh, these two guys are buddies. They just got to be. They have to be.
When they first met, when they were first working together in Vancouver, it was when we were going on a flight together, and Brian showed up in like corduroy pants and something, and he's like, I thought I looked quite nice. I mean, you know him now, kind of always just tied,
Very
disheveled.
much so, yeah.
You know, Pat's always would always be giving him a hard time, but he gave him a hard time. He made him basically change. Like he wouldn't let him come on the trip. And when he was wearing, he had to put a suit on. So that was Pat. It was professional too, and that's the thing about Pat as well. He was very professional, and he took everything seriously. But I do think it sort of came from his dad, you know, Jack, and growing up. It was sort of like, you know, on Sundays you wear your best clothes, and when you put your best foot, you put your best self forward all the time.
You shine your shoes if they have a spark of dust on them.
Yeah,
it's that kind of mentality.
Pride. I think it's pride.
It was pride.
It's pride. Yeah.
And and it's quite endearing though. So when you see those stories later on, it's not just about sort of being, you know, sartorially savvy. It's about it's something in his character that he was always sort of helped define who he was.
The other remarkable thing is, and you kind of touched on it with Brian Burke, and we hear this. We hear this in the NFL with the Bill Belichick. So you have Bill Belichick, or in this case, Pat Quinn, and then you have the umbrella of people that have worked under him, that have gone on to do this, coach this, general manager this, assistant this, player this. The umbrella of, as an executive, of what he's done and who he's brought in as new people. Like Brian Burke's first job was with the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
Basically, when
George
it comes
McPhee.
George McPhee, exactly. The list is endless of what this guy actually nurtured, and you know, it's almost like a university prof that has graduated these 500 people.
One and interesting because it's what a tough university prof too, because he was loving and tough, and like you can just imagine those. I mean, I heard great stories from those early, like the people in the office with the Canucks. A couple of people that just sort of I was able to chat with about what it was like, and battles between, like, you know, Pat and Brian, and George McPhee coming along, and just it really is sort of one of those lives that touched so many, and that sort of it still ripples, you know, through the league. I mean, he still, like, he coached in the juniors, like Subban and Matt Duchene, and like these, it's still, his impact is, even though he's gone, is still continuing on, and all of those people will have really endearing stories about Pat,
sure,
and also stories where they go, "Oh my God, like, give me a break," and that's who he was, and that's sort of, but they all loved him because it was impossible, I as far as I know, not to.
Well, you know, it'll be interesting. So all of a sudden we find out from Dan. You know, we talk about all these, you know, sort of hardcore, hardworking, blue collar people who have gone on and become humble. That Dan's like, family's incredibly wealthy. He went to school in limousines. He Upper Canada College. He had what?
That's funny. As you know, one of the things that I felt dear to this. I mean, not to get too personal. My when I was writing this book, so my father was in construction, actually. Like he was
same here.
He went to Ryerson. He was a dropout at Ryerson, and then went.
Me too.
He worked really hard in his own company and started, like, basically working construction and stuff. And he actually passed away when I was writing this book. So in the middle of that,
that's tough. Oh, my God.
It's so, for as a writer though, it's sort of, you know, it becomes part of you, and you're writing about. And I'm writing about Pat, and I'm writing about, even when I'm talking with Doug about his dad and his upbringing, this is their life, and I'm writing about their life, but I can sort of feel a little bit more about when they talk about what they admired about, you know, like Doug's dad working in Kingston Penitentiary, and just, like, you know, working so hard and doing what he could to make a better life for the other person. And Jack Quinn, I think, sometimes had like 5 jobs, like Pat's dad. Like, it was work ethic like crazy. And so I could sort of reflect, you know, I was able to sort of think, you know, like, about how, you know, fortunate I was in the lessons I had, and I could sort of see that, you know, obviously so many other people learn from those kinds of experiences. So it's great.
So, and this would be more of a question you'd want to talk to Pat Quinn about, but I'm wondering if you got to it with anybody you interviewed. There was a time when Quinn was, I guess, out of the NHL for a bit of a period of time. Hockey Canada gave him the post of a junior position. Mm-hmm. And people he accepted it because he really had nothing else going on. And there was a time where you kind of wondered who's the team that's going to step up and bring this guy in. And the months went by.
Yeah.
And then he got the junior program, and then months went by. He finally got the Oilers program. Wasn't really given much of a chance with the Edmonton Oilers. You'd think that it would last a little bit longer considering the success he had with some of the younger players. But was there ever any ill will that people that you talked to thought, you know what, there was a number of teams that kind of missed the boat on a guy just because maybe somebody or someone thought this guy's a little too old for our organization.
Is exactly what happened. I mean, there was actually a lot of I don't know if it's ill will or hurt. I think I think it was difficult to sort of after his passing to get his. I mean, I'd love to have been able to sit down and get his take on it. And I was able to get through some other sources and other interviews journalists had done, get a little bit of that and piece that together with their great work.
Good,
to get some of what they're feeling, but also, I mean, speaking just with his wife Sandra and good friends about that time of the game kind of pushing him out in a way, and that hurt. I mean, he was a proud man who loved the game. He really enjoyed working in the junior program. He really enjoyed these young kids, even though they kind of I mean they really respect him. He's like Pat Quinn,
Sure.
but they had a great little banter relationship. He called like the Subban, the Scooby-Doo, his little 360 he would do sometimes, and he'd make and Subban laughs about that when he sort of talks about it now. But it was sort of he felt he was not given the chance to continue in the game, and that the game had decided, or people in the game had decided he was too old and they were moving on.
Because he wasn't blackballed. It's not like he did something bad and you're like, oh, we don't want him in here.
Yeah.
But it just...
No, it's the under your breath stuff like, oh, I think he's been probably done.
Yeah.
Like it, and that's just as hurtful as anything else.
It is.
And it was hurtful, and I think that's part of it. That was tough for him. I mean, he then went on and did work with the Hockey Hall of Fame, and he was never going to leave the game. He was always going to be in it, but he wanted to be in the game, and the Edmonton situation definitely hurt him. That was hard, the way it ended. It wasn't something that he was sort of like, okay, I'll just walk away. Like he wanted to be back. I mean, the way he left the Leafs was tough too, and
Sure.
and like the first time they didn't make the playoffs when he was there, and then he was. But I mean, obviously things were changing, and there was that kind of stuff was happening. So I think the last, not that like the last years of his life were sad or anything, but he was sort of hurt by that sort of retirement that wasn't his decision.
You brought up a really good point about the Toronto Maple Leafs. I was covering the team at the time when John Ferguson Jr. was there, and there was a power struggle.
Yeah.
There was a power struggle between Ferguson Jr. and Quinn, and Ferguson Jr. ended up winning. Did you ever talk about that and what that meant at that time? Because could you imagine as a Leafs fan, this guy over here, not me, this guy over here, could you imagine as a Leafs fan if Pat Quinn, who rightfully, in my opinion, should have won that power struggle, but that was MLSE. That's their decision at the time.
Yeah, that was the worst.
Yeah, could you imagine
Not a good time.
if he's the guy that wins that and continues on as head coach and general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs?
That's a good question. I mean, I didn't think too much about sort of what Pat would have done next. I haven't really done a lot of thinking around that. It's a good question.
Yeah, you would have needed a double extra buck.
And I'd have to go back and take a look at that.
It's a pretty damn big buck.
But like, how do you have sort of like a choose your own adventure? That would actually be a pretty fun book. Maybe someone else could write that. That would be interesting. Sort of what would happen.
Yeah, Dan. Maybe someone else could write a book. I'm just going to go to your section. I don't need the Dewey Decimal System. I just go in the Robson section.
The Robson section. It's like the wall that goes straight down King.
I don't know what happened, but I know Ferguson he was like 36 or 37 by that time, and I mean, I think there was I know Pat was it was hard for him to sort of relinquish control and to sort of see how things were changing over. And that's what, I mean, that is also what happened in Vancouver. It does speak to part to Pat's nature in that he liked to be in control and not having in control. Like when he went over to Vancouver, he didn't go over just to be the coach. He went over to be the president, general manager, and coach of that team. And then eventually became the general manager. And but like he wanted control. And in Toronto, when that wasn't going to happen, I mean, I guess to be fair, when you have someone that wants control and you don't want them to have control anymore, something's got to give. But it was tough for him.
So you mentioned both books, obviously, this now in paper book form, right in time for Christmas. The Dougie's book that just came out. As you know, Doug was on Monday, and his schedule being what it is, and knowing him and what his schedule is like, the way that I do, like his schedule is terrible.
Yeah,
like the demand. Sometimes people talk. I heard someone was talking about Gretzky the other day, just socially. Someone said, geez, I saw Wayne. He didn't look very good. He looked like this. He looked like that. I said, you have no idea the weight it is to be some of these guys. Yeah. The weight to be Doug Gilmour, and the weight works like this. If he's walking on the street, if he goes into a bar, if he goes shopping, it doesn't matter where he is always Dougie.
Yeah.
It's not even Doug Gilmour. It's Killer, it's Dougie, and you immediately, that want that people want from you is really demanding. And that to me, sometimes, when you get to know someone, if it's Doug and you're asking me, that's my biggest concern is at some point I just hope he finds time for himself and his family and Sonia and everybody else, or what he told me one time that, when you go out into the eastern part of Ontario, so if you go towards Kingston, there's an area around Picton called Prince Edward County. It's beautiful, and he loves it out there. That's when we did the wine, the Gilmore wines. It came from Carlo Estates in Prince Edward County, and he said, "Man, I wouldn't mind doing that." And he pointed to, it was like a where they refurbish furniture.
Yeah,
and he goes, "I wouldn't mind having one of those little barns on the side of the road where I could just work on like old rocking chairs and stuff." And you'd never think that he would say that, but in reality, just to have a little bit of peace of mind, that would be important to him.
I've noticed it's interesting in chatting with him, because the one thing that does stand out for me about Doug is that he's Dougie to people when they come in the bar. So he's, and I don't know like Wayne, but I know myself. If I came in as a kid growing up, I'd be like, and I was kind of be like, I wouldn't talk to him, but that's just my personality too. But people come up to Dougie, and it's never like. It's just like, hey Dougie, how's it going? It's like he's your buddy, and that is actually that is what he's like though. Like we met for this book once a week. We'd meet up at Originals Ale House in Leaside, where we used to go all the time. And he knows everybody there. He knows the bartenders, like he knows the owners, and he's been knowing them for years. And it's like he's a genuine person in that way, where he's friends. So he's this, like, every time you meet him, he's gonna meet you. He's gonna chat with you.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, there's a lot of people who want to meet him. So I've watched at these book signings. I've been to a few of them, and I get to stand off to the side because no one knows who I am. So it's great. So I can kind of sit there and go, this is fun, and watch him go through. And it's just, he gets up every single time and does a photo with somebody. And there's a policy. I mean, there's a policy that then it's not his policy. And I don't know if people will understand that, but you're not supposed to have memorabilia that people sign, because he's signing a lot of things.
Sure.
And the goal is to obviously sell the book, and also people show up sometimes and try and sell like paraphernalia and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but he and I guess I shouldn't put this hint out there, but he'll never not do it unless he knows it. It's like, if you bring your jersey, he's gonna sign it. He's gonna get up with you and stand, and he loves that.
It's
but
who
that's
he
a lot
is.
of squats in over a few hours. Like we had over I think it was 500 people came out to Orangeville. There was about 500 people out in Sarnia the night in Windsor, and it's remarkable just to see in these places. And you see the faces of people when they meet him still, and it's still Dougie in '93.
Oh yeah,
and it's still Dougie, like, who's a star, but also who's your buddy, and that's how he presents. So I think he's going to be exhausted. I know he's exhausted, and I know it's been tough too, because because he's still dealing with the fact that his mother passed away, and I know that was like he sort of got right into this book tour right away, and I think this has been it's a lot of fun for him. And I think he's also going to be looking forward to the end of November when he can go home.
I think so too. And
he can just sort of rest on the couch.
Yeah. I'm afraid to ask you this, Dan, as we're closing out this interview, but what's next for Dan Robson right now? What
I'll be honest. If I go into Chapters and I see King Tut, the unknown story, I'm going, Robson, that does it.
Well, if I could, I mean, right now, if I could, Clint Malarchuk's Crazy Game's still out there. That'd be great, because that was, I loved writing that book, and I love Clint so much, because we had he's just such a personality. He's such a big personality.
He was great on our show.
We had him in studio for half an hour, and at the end of it, he's like, "That's it. Can I say longer?" And
then we said, "Hey, I said maybe we should come down to where you live now." He goes, I just got out of all that shit. I don't need a guy like you, because I don't need like a guy like you coming into my life. He goes, that's the last thing I need.
He's great, and so that one's still out there. And I think and also Buck Martinez wrote a book with Buck, and I just really enjoyed hanging out with Buck, talking baseball.
That's a cool thing.
Twitter. Yeah, I mean, we got to hang out and just talk old school baseball, and that was just a lot of fun.
And a lot of people don't know that that's actually Buck's voice.
Oh yeah,
it's
Buck's voice.
When Buck goes to McDonald's in the drive-thru, that's how Buck orders food.
But I have this thing with Buck, because I kind of view him almost like a grandfather now. Like
sure.
we got really close. We were working on this book, and so every time I see people on Twitter complain about his voice, I'm like, shut up. I don't say anything, but I'm like, leave him alone. I love him. Anyway, Buck's and then Quinn and then Gilmore, and right now I haven't. I'm working. There will be something else for sure. But
is Sportsnet going? Hello.
I didn't take time off from Sportsnet to work on Gilmore because it was exhausting time doing it because I was working full time there. But I'm still writing features for Sportsnet and doing stuff there. So
well, you know what? Let's stay connected, Dan, because we'd love to have you back, man. And not just for the Quinn Gilmore book. We can talk whatever you're working on. You've been an awesome guest. Thanks for joining us.
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, storytelling. It's simply the best. You wonderful.
Tomorrow, Scott Morrison's actually here.
Oh, is he?
You're a good friend of ours.
Oh,
right?
yeah. He's fantastic.
Does he owe you money? Does he owe you $50 or anything?
Should I remind him about anything?
No. I owe him all the work he did before me. So
okay. Look, before you go, because it is a 3-shot studio, or we're obviously going live here on camera. So if you leave, you block out because we're in such a tiny room.
It is small, even though it doesn't look like it.
I'll just some of the things that we enjoy in the show. This is what we bring to people. So you brought as you say, a beautiful storytelling element to Raw Mike Richards. These beautiful stories of coming from blue collar families and making it big and still being humble. Where I bring you stories like this. Get a load of the goof in the white shirt. This is in Las Vegas, and it looks to me, Dave, like they are on the steps of the Hard Rock. That's where it kind of looks like. And we talk about friends who, once they get beat once, you should walk away.
Yeah,
don't worry about the comeback.
Don't go back.
So here's a story of what not to do. So Buddy in the white shirt yelling at this guy, I don't know what started it, who's just, I think, on his phone at the bottom of the stairs, won't let him go. Here's a bad story of what not to do. So he's chirping him. Oh, boy. Okay. So people are laughing.
And he goes back for more.
Yeah, so the guy's walking away. You don't go back up the stairs. You just don't do it. Don't do it. No. Watch how long it takes. Look, he's sticking his face right in the guy who just dropped him like a bad habit seconds ago. But he walks away.
And the guy in the black doesn't want anything to do with it.
No. But, oh no. So Aquaman, all of a sudden, continues to push his agenda. It's not going to end well. Thus, the continuing of the filming by this gentleman who sent in this video. It continues. We'll get a load of this. Here it comes. Oh. Now, get a load of this. That's what we do here, Dan. You had the wonderful stories.
Sometimes.
You have the wonderful stories. I have Chubby there who just went down. He's out. Yeah, that's a great way. See what we did there? That's what we do here on Raw Mike Richards. We just make sure it ends with
well, Mike, it's
embarrassment and sadness.
Yeah, it's as Russell said to me earlier on the show. It's 5 past Ireland, so we got to get going.
Is that what he said?
That's what I wouldn't lie to you.
Don't be talking about drinking. Don't talk to an Irish person. I'm still mad about yesterday.
I believe
Those
it.
bastards from Denmark.
5-1 to Denmark.
By the way, they didn't even invent Danish. Danish isn't in theirs. I think that was the Jews. I'd like to thank Dan Robson, who now is going, get me out of here. Just get me out. I just got to leave. The Pat Quinn book available on paperback now. And then, of course, Doug Gilmore, killer, fantastic book. Thanks so much for coming in, Dan.
thanks for having me, guys.
As he runs to the taxi. See you tomorrow. We got Scotty's coming in.
Scott Morrison.
From Sportsnet.
Yeah. You got it.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
More wonderful stories. Oh, we can only hope. Tomorrow.